The snow never stopped falling in Winterfell that year. It came down in sheets of white, burying the courtyards, frosting the stone walls, and muting the sound of men at arms as they went about their duties. The north was always cold, but for Sansa Stark, Winterfell's familiar walls had never felt so much like a cage. She had begged her father to let her travel to King's Landing. She had dreamed of marrying a golden prince, of wearing silk gowns, of listening to songs instead of howling winds. But Lord Eddard Stark, grim as the statues in the crypt, had denied her. "The South is not what you think," he had told her. "You are safest here." And so she had stayed, forced to watch as Arya was granted leave to ride south with their father. At first, Sansa had been furious. She had sulked, pacing her chambers, blaming Arya for being chosen instead of her. Yet as the weeks turned into months, news came trickling back from Ravens. King Robert's death, her father's arrest, the Lannisters gripping the throne with claws sharper than any direwolf's. Sansa had wept when she heard of her father's execution in the capital, yet she wept alone, for she had not been there to beg mercy. But guilt was not the same as safety. Her staying behind had changed everything, and not for the better. Winterfell was no longer her home, but a fortress closing in on itself. Her mother rode south after hearing of Ned's capture, leaving Sansa behind with Bran and Rickon. Robb marched to war, the banners of the north flying high, and suddenly the great castle was in the hands of children. Maester Luwin whispered counsel. Sir Roderick trained men-at-arms, but every decision weighed heavier on Sansa, the eldest Stark left behind. It should have been a chance for her to step into her mother's shoes, to act as the Lady of Winterfell. But she was no Catelyn. Sansa was polite, gentle, full of courtesy, qualities that in war seemed fragile as glass. She could host a feast and smile as expected, but she could not command respect from hardened warriors who looked at her as a girl, not a leader. And slowly, she began to realize that staying had only given her a front-row seat to the fall of everything she loved. The Bolton men came first, under guise of loyalty. Bruce Bolton's banners flew beside Robb's in the field, but his bastard Ramsay lurked nearer home, circling like a wolf outside the walls. When word spread that Winterfell was left vulnerable, the castle braced for betrayal. Sansa, trapped within, felt the stirrings of dread. She remembered her father's words, "The lone wolf dies, but the pack survives." Yet what good was a pack when the wolves were scattered? Arya lost somewhere on the roads, Robb at war, Jon sworn to the wall, her mother gone. What was left of their pack now? Only her, Bran, and little Rickon, and she, the eldest, felt helpless. The day Theon Greyjoy marched back into Winterfell, cloaked in iron-born pride, she understood fully what her father had meant about cages. She had known Theon as Robb's companion, as a boy with quick laughter and sharper arrogance, but the man who strode into the hall and declared himself master of Winterfell was a stranger. He sneered at Bran, ignored Rickon, and when his eyes fell upon her, Sansa felt a chill colder than any winter wind. "Lady Sansa," he called her, mocking courtesy. "It seems Winterfell needs a ruler of stronger hand than children and old men." From that moment, she became less a lady and more a prisoner. Guards watched her steps. Her words were measured, her letters intercepted, her very presence used as leverage against the North's loyalty. And all she could think was how different it might have been had she gone south. There, she would have been a hostage to the Lannisters, yes, but here she was a hostage to a boy she had once shared meals with. The irony bit deep. She had thought staying meant safety. Instead, it meant she would bear witness to Winterfell's humiliation, unable to flee, unable to fight. Each night she prayed to the old gods beneath the heart tree, begging them to let her be brave, begging them to bring her mother back, her brothers back, anyone. But the gods were silent, and the snow kept falling. burying Winterfell deeper in silence and despair. And so the Lady of Winterfell remained, yet no lady at all, but a caged bird watching wolves circle outside the gates. Theon Greyjoy's rule over Winterfell began not with a coronation, but with fear. The first order he gave was to have the Stark banners taken down, the direwolf sigil ripped from the towers. Sansa watched from the balcony as the grey direwolf was pulled away, replaced with the black kraken of House Greyjoy. The cloth flapped in the bitter wind, and though it was only fabric, she felt as though something alive had been ripped apart. Winterfell looked foreign with that sigil hanging over it, like a heart beating for the wrong body. The people of Winterfell despised Theon, though they dared not say it openly. They whispered in corners, their eyes full of hatred. Servants who had once laughed in the kitchens now kept their heads bowed and voices low. The soldiers he brought with him, smug and brutish, treated the halls as spoils of war. They drank openly, grabbed at women, and mocked the Starks' ways. Sansa could feel the resentment boiling, but no one dared move against him, not with the hostages he kept under his thumb, her brothers. Bran, still broken from his fall, was paraded like a token to prove Theon's false lordship. Rickon, too young to understand, cried when he was separated from her for even a short while. Theon would call Bran Little Lord, with mocking cheer, seating him in the great hall as though he were still master of Winterfell, only to speak over him and twist his words for his own gain. Sansa hated it most when Theon would tousle Rickon's hair, pretending affection, all while holding the boy's life in his hands. "You should smile more, Lady Sansa," Theon told her once at supper, his eyes glinting with cruel amusement. "Your people look to you, after all. They need to see that their lady accepts their new lord." "I will smile," she replied, softly, "when you stop pretending to be something you're not." Theon's smirk faltered. For a heartbeat his mask cracked, and she saw the boy Robb once called friend, the boy who had laughed at feasts and ridden with them in the Godswood. But the mask snapped back into place, and his pride burned hotter. "You are lucky, Sansa," he said in a low voice, close enough for her to feel his breath. "I value you more than the others. You're a Stark, and Winterfell needs a Stark." The words left her cold. He did not value her as herself, but as a symbol, a tool to make his usurpation look less hollow. He wanted her obedience, her presence at his side to cloak his treachery and legitimacy, and the terrifying truth was that he could force it. She could not run, nor could she fight. Her role was to endure, and it gnawed at her like a worm burrowing into wood. The nights grew darker, heavier. She dreamt of wolves howling in the distance, of her father's stern face, of Arya's laughter. She dreamt too of King's Landing, of golden-haired princes and cruel queens, and wondered if staying in Winterfell had truly been safer. Safety was a lie. There was no safety left in Westeros, not for Starks, not for wolves. Then came the rumors. Theon's men whispered of escape attempts, of plots, of secret tunnels in Winterfell's bones. Some claimed Bran had been seen slipping through the castle with Osha, the wildling woman. Others said Rickon had vanished in the night, only to be found in the crypts, whispering to dead Starks. Theon raged when he heard of it, but Sansa felt a flicker of something she had not felt in weeks. Hope. Her brothers still had spirit. They had not broken, but hope was dangerous. One evening, when the snows had piled high against the walls, Theon summoned Sansa to the hall. The torches cast flickering shadows, and the Kraken banner loomed above them. He looked unsettled, even desperate. "They defy me," he muttered, pacing. "They don't fear me enough. They mock me when I turn my back. I will not be made a fool in my own hall." Sansa kept her face calm, though her heart raced. She knew what such talk led to. Men who feared losing power would grasp at cruelty to keep it. "You want them to fear you," she said carefully, "but fear is not the same as respect. Respect Theon spat the word. Respect is for lords. I am a prince. They will fear me, or they will die. The next day, smoke filled the air above Winterfell. 2 small bodies were brought out, charred beyond recognition, hung before the gates as a warning. Theon declared them Bran and Rickon Stark. The people of Winterfell wailed, their grief real, though none could tell if it was truth. Sansa stood among them, her face pale as ash. She did not know if it was her brothers hanging there or some other poor innocents. But she did know one thing. Winterfell had become a tomb, and she, its lady, was the prisoner forced to keep watch over its slow, cruel death. The corpses hung for days at the gates, their small shapes swaying in the wind, blackened and twisted beyond recognition. Theon left them there as proof of his power, as a message to the north. But for Sansa, every glance at those bodies was a torment. Bran, Rickon, her little brothers. She could not look, yet she could not turn away either. Their absence echoed in the hallways. She no longer heard Rickon's wild laughter, no longer saw Bran's solemn gaze watching everything from his chair. The castle was emptier now, as if its very spirit had bled out into the snow. But doubt began to creep in. She had known Bran's stubborn strength, Rickon's restless mischief. Would they have been so easily caught? Would Theon have truly done it? She remembered the flicker in his eyes, the hesitation before he announced their deaths. Sansa began to wonder if it was a lie. Yet she could not be sure, and that uncertainty was its own torture. The people of Winterfell whispered in corners, their grief turning to hatred. Mothers clutched their children tighter. Old Nan wept openly, refusing to be comforted, muttering that the gods would have vengeance. The castle was heavy with despair, and Theon strutted through it like a man desperate to hold onto a crown made of thorns. At supper, he demanded Sansa sit beside him. The seat had once belonged to her father, and then to Robb, when he was named king in the north. Now it belonged to a Greyjoy who had stolen it. She sat stiffly, her hands folded in her lap, her face a mask. He poured her wine, smiling too widely. "You see now, don't you?" he said. "They respect me, they fear me." Sansa's voice was flat. "They hate you." The smile slipped. For a moment, anger flashed in his eyes, but then he leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Hate is better than mockery. I'd rather they curse my name than laugh at it." Sansa looked at him, and for the first time she felt something almost like pity. He was no lord, no king, not even truly a conqueror. He was a boy, trying to fill boots too large for him, desperate for approval he would never earn. And yet, pity did not make him less dangerous. It made him more so. That night she dreamed again of wolves, a great pack running through snow, their howls filling the air, their eyes burning like fire. She woke with tears on her cheeks, whispering Bran's name, Rickon's name. Somewhere deep inside her she wanted to believe they still lived. Days passed, and then weeks. Winterfell became a place of ghosts. The servants moved like shadows. Theon grew more erratic, snapping at his own men, drinking more heavily, accusing others of betrayal. He would storm into Sansa's chambers without warning, demanding her presence, demanding her smiles, demanding she play the part of the Stark lady who supported him. She complied outwardly, but inside she hardened. If she could not fight him with steel, she would fight with silence, with endurance. Then whispers reached her ears, whispers that stoked the faint spark of hope she had kept buried. 2 children had been seen near the mill outside the walls. A farmer's boys, some said, gone missing after Theon's men rode that way. Others swore the bodies on the gates were not Bran and Rickon at all. The rumour spread like fire through straw, and though none dared speak it too loudly, Sansa felt the change. People began to look at her differently, with eyes that said perhaps the Starks are not gone after all. She clung to that thought, even when fear told her not to. But hope is dangerous. Hope makes prisoners restless. The first rebellion came from within. A handful of Winterfell men tried to free themselves from Theon's grip, striking at his guards in the night. It was messy, desperate, and doomed to fail. They were caught, dragged before the hall, and executed without ceremony. Their blood stained the courtyard stones, and the Kraken banner fluttered above as if mocking them. Theon grew more paranoid after that. He trusted no one, not even his own men. And in his growing madness, he turned again to Sansa. "You will. Stand with me," he told her one evening, gripping her arm so tightly it hurt. "You will tell them I am Lord, that I am rightful. They will believe it if it comes from you." Sansa stared at him, her face pale, her heart hammering. "I am no liar," she whispered. "You are a Stark," he snapped. "That is all that matters. They will follow you, or they will follow me through you." She pulled her arm free, trembling with rage she could not voice. She wanted to scream, to claw his face, to curse him for the coward and traitor he was. But she held her tongue. She had learned something in these long, cold weeks. Words could be sharper than knives, but silence could be sharper still. And so she said nothing. She sat at his side, her face like carved stone, and let the people see her silence for what it was. Not loyalty, not consent, but quiet rebellion. Theon had not yet realized it, but Sansa's silence was undoing him faster than any blade. Winterfell was no longer a castle, it was a powder keg. The air was thick with mistrust, with whispered rumors slipping like smoke through the corridors. Theon tried to stamp them out, ordering beatings, dragging suspected gossips into the courtyard, shouting himself hoarse that Bran and Rickon were dead. Yet the more he insisted, the less people believed him. Sansa saw it in the way the servants looked at her. Their eyes searched her face for answers, for truth. Some even dared to bow lower, to mutter, "The North remembers." She never spoke back, never confirmed, never denied. Her silence had become her weapon, and the people carried it like a torch in the dark. Theon felt it too. He could not shake her presence. He thought he had chained her to his rule, but instead she haunted him. At meals, her stillness drew more eyes than his boasts. When she walked the courtyards, guarded on every side, the people looked at her as though she were still their lady, their wolf, their Stark. "You think they love you," he hissed at her one night, drunk and pacing her chamber like a caged beast. "But love is weak. Fear keeps men loyal, not love." Sansa did not look at him. She stared out the window, where the snow was falling in quiet sheets. "Fear makes men betray. You sooner." The words struck him like a slap. For a moment he looked almost broken, but then his face hardened, and he left her without another word. It was only days later that his crumbling grip on Winterfell began to shatter. The first sign came in the dead of night. The horns. 3 long blasts echoing across the snow. Not Lannisters, not Starks, wildlings. No, the dread was worse than that. Ramsay Snow had come. Theon tried to rally his men, barking orders in the courtyard, but his voice was drowned by the sound of hooves, of screams, of fire. Ramsay's men poured in, their torches lighting the night like hell had broken loose. Winterfell's gates burned, its towers glowed orange, and the stench of smoke curled into every chamber. Sansa hid in the shadows, her heart hammering. She did not know if this new force came as saviors or destroyers, but the look on Theon's face told her enough. Fear, pure, unguarded fear. Ramsay was no ally. He was worse. The chaos was endless. Men cut down in the yard, servants screaming, horses bolting through fire. Sansa tried to move her way toward the crypts, toward safety, but the corridors were filled with smoke and blood. In the din, she caught sight of Bran's direwolf Summer, darting like a shadow through the chaos, teeth bared, eyes blazing. Her heart nearly broke in two. If Summer was here, then Bran must still live. Hope surged hot and wild in her chest, but hope did not save her from what came next. By dawn, Winterfell was ash and ruin. Ramsay's banner, flayed men, crimson on black, hung above the gates where once the direwolf had flown. Theon was dragged through the courtyard, beaten, broken, his pride stripped as clean as the snow beneath him. His men scattered, his rule destroyed. Sansa, pale and silent, was brought before Ramsay himself. He was nothing like Theon, where Theon was desperate. Ramsay was calm, smiling, almost gentle in his cruelty. His eyes, pale and sharp as knives, studied her like a hunter studies prey. "The Lady of Winterfell," he said softly, bowing with mock courtesy. "The wolf who stayed in her den, what a treasure you are." She did not answer. She had learned silence was her strongest shield, yet inside, fear coiled tighter than ever. Ramsay's smile was not a boy's mask, not a crumbling facade like Theon's. It was the smile of someone who enjoyed breaking things. He took her hand, his grip cold, and kissed it as though she were queen. "Do not worry, my lady," he whispered. "You'll never leave Winterfell. Not while I hold it. Not while you're mine." The castle walls seemed to close around her then, the snow outside muffling every sound, every hope. She had thought Theon was her captor, but Theon was only a shadow of the real nightmare. Now she understood. Winterfell was no cage of iron, no cell of stone. It was a prison made of blood and memory, and Ramsay Snow held the keys. Winterfell had always been grey stone and cold winds, but under Ramsay Snow it became something far worse, something alive with cruelty. The fires from his attack still scarred the walls, black streaks running down the towers. The stench of burned flesh lingered in the air long after the bodies were gone. Servants spoke only in whispers now, and even their whispers trembled with fear. For Sansa, every corridor became a trial. Ramsay liked to keep her close, parading her through the halls like a prize he had claimed. His hand would rest on her shoulder as if to reassure, his voice soft and mocking as he told the men, "The Lady of Winterfell stands with me." But everyone could see the truth in her face. The silence, the stiffness, the way her eyes never met his. She was not with him. She was his captive, his trophy. At night, the true horror began. Ramsay had no need of open threats. He preferred games. He would summon her to dine with him, speaking of trivial things, how the snow tasted on his tongue, how the hounds needed feeding, how the screams of dying men carried through the halls. Then he would watch her face, smiling when she flinched, smiling wider when she forced herself not to. "You're strong," he told her once, his pale eyes gleaming. "Stronger than the rest. That's why I like you. That's why you'll stay." She wanted to spit in his face, to claw his eyes out, to scream until her throat bled. But she did none of those things. She sat in silence, because she had learned silence cut deeper than any outburst. He wanted her broken. She refused him that. Satisfaction. Still, her strength was tested every day. His hounds, huge and snarling, were loosed in the kennels at night. Their howls echoed through Winterfell, and sometimes, too often, those howls were joined by human screams. Servants disappeared. A guard who displeased him was found the next morning in pieces. The banners of the flayed man hung over the gates, not as decoration, but as warning. Sansa clung to one thought to keep herself from falling into despair: Bran and Rickon. She did not know where they were if they lived, but she remembered Summer's shadow on the night of the attack. That had been no dream. Somewhere her brothers had survived. Somewhere the pack was still alive. But hope had to be hidden deep. Ramsay fed on it like a wolf fed on fear. "You miss your family," he said one night as he circled her like a hawk. "I can see it in your eyes. Don't worry. You won't be alone. You have me now. I'll be your family." The way he said it made her skin crawl. He wanted not just her obedience, but her soul, her very sense of belonging. He wanted to erase the Starks and replace them with his name, his madness. She bit her tongue until she tasted blood rather than give him a word in answer. Outside, the north stirred. Ravens came and went, though Ramsay tried to control them. Whispers of Robb Stark's victories reached even Winterfell's broken halls. The young wolf, they called him, undefeated in battle. Sansa's heart ached at the thought of her brother so far away, never knowing what had become of her. Did he think she was safe, locked away in the snow? Did he know the prison Winterfell had become? But even Robb's victories could not reach her here. Winterfell was isolated, surrounded by snow and silence. Ramsay's grip tightened with each passing day, and Sansa felt more and more like a bird with its wings torn out. Then came the day. He led her to the kennels. The hounds snarled in their cages, their teeth glistening, their bodies straining against chains. Ramsay stroked one of their heads with sick affection, smiling as it snapped at the bars. "They're loyal," he said, "more loyal than men. They don't lie, they don't betray, they only hunger. I like that about them." He turned to her then, his smile thin. "You should learn from them, my lady. Loyalty is simple, obedience is survival." The dogs growled, their yellow eyes gleaming. Sansa stood still, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She would not give him her fear. She would not bow. When he finally released her, leading her back through the snow, she knew one thing for certain. If she stayed silent forever, she might survive. But surviving would not be enough. One day, she promised herself, she would see Ramsay fall. She would see Winterfell cleansed of him, the krakens and flayed men torn down, the direwolf raised high again. Until then, she would endure. She would be stone, she would be ice, she would be Winterfell itself. And Winterfell remembers. Snow lay heavy on the roofs of Winterfell, but beneath its white silence, whispers of war crept like fire through dry wood. Sansa heard them in the kitchens, in the courtyards, even from the lips of Ramsay's own men when they thought no one was listening. Robb Stark was winning. The young wolf, they called him, breaker of armies, king in the north. His name carried weight sharper than steel. To the soldiers of the Dreadfort he was a threat. To the people of Winterfell he was hope. But hope was a dangerous thing to wear on one's face. Ramsay's cruelty sharpened with every rumor of Robb's victories. He would smile when the news came, a thin-lipped smile that never reached his pale eyes, and then someone would pay for it. A servant accused of stealing bread was flayed alive. A stable boy who muttered Robb's name was dragged to the kennels. Sansa understood the pattern quickly. The stronger Robb grew, the crueler Ramsay became. He ruled not through loyalty, but through terror, and every victory for her brother made Ramsay's grip on Winterfell tremble, and still he clung to her. At feasts, Ramsay would sit her beside him, as though she were his bride, feeding her morsels of meat with his own hand, mocking gentleness. The men laughed uneasily, raising cups, pretending this farce was normal. Sansa endured in silence, her face smooth, her eyes fixed on nothing. She had learned that every word she spoke was a weapon he could twist against her. Silence was her shield. One night, as music played weakly in the hall, Ramsay leaned close to her ear. "Do you know what your brother fights for?" he whispered. "He fights for you, for Winterfell. He thinks he can win you back, foolish boy. By the time he arrives, there'll be nothing left to claim." His words struck like a blade, but she gave no answer. She would not give him her pain. Yet alone, in her chamber that night, she allowed herself to cry. She pressed her hand to the stone wall, feeling its cold steadiness, and whispered into the dark, "Robb, hurry, please." The gods gave no answer. It was Maester Luwin who reminded her she was not as powerless as she felt. One afternoon, when Ramsay was away on a hunt, the old man found her in the godswood, kneeling before the heart tree. His face was lined with sorrow, but his voice carried quiet strength. "My lady," he said softly. Winterfell has always endured. The Starks have always endured. You must remember that. I'm not my mother, Sansa murmured. I'm not Lady Stark. I can't rule, I can't fight. I'm just trapped. Lewin shook his head. You are more than you know. Do you think strength is only in swords and armor? Strength can be silence, it can be patience, it can be surviving when others wish you broken. She looked at him, her throat tight. And if I survive only to watch Winterfell fall? What strength is that? He did not answer, but in his silence she found something like truth. Survival itself could be defiance. Days turned into weeks, and the snow piled higher. Winterfell grew quieter, emptier, like a body wasting away. The soldiers grew restless, their loyalty fraying. The small folk hated Ramsay openly now, spitting after he passed, hiding food from his men. Even the air felt tense, thick with something waiting to break. It was in this fragile stillness that another raven came, carrying news darker than any. Before, Robb's army had taken great victories, but betrayal stirred among the northern lords. The name Bolton was whispered. Rose Bolton, Ramsay's father, fought beside Robb, but no one trusted him fully. Some claimed he would turn, some claimed he already had. Sansa read the words in secret, her hands trembling. If the Boltons betrayed. Robb, if Ramsay held Winterfell, then her family's cause was already lost. That night, Ramsay came to her chambers, his smile sharp, his hands clasped behind his back. The game is nearly over, he said softly. Do you hear it? The wolves howl, but soon they will be silent. And then you will be mine, truly mine. Sansa's stomach turned, but she lifted her chin, her face as still as ice. Winterfell will never be yours, she whispered. Ramsay leaned close, his breath cold against her cheek. Everything dies, my lady. Castles, names, wolves. But some things endure, pain, for instance. Pain lasts forever. When he left, Sansa sat alone, her hands shaking, her body trembling with fear. Yet beneath the fear, something harder began to take shape. A resolve colder than the stone walls around her. If Winterfell was to burn, she would not let herself burn with it. If Ramsay thought her broken, she would let him believe it, until the moment came when she could strike. The North remembered, and so would she. The snows grew heavier as winter deepened, but the news that drifted into Winterfell was colder still. At first, it came in fragments. Robb marching south, whispers of discontent among his bannermen, rumors of fray bridges and broken vows. Sansa clung to each scrap of hope, waiting for a raven that might tell her her brother was on his way to save her. Instead, she received silence, and silence was worse than lies. Then one evening, Ramsay returned from a hunt with his men, blood spattered on his clothes, a smirk carved into his face. He summoned Sansa to the hall, the hounds at his feet. She walked stiffly beside him, the servant's eyes following her, with pity and fear. "My lady," Ramsay said, voice dripping with mock courtesy, "I bring you tidings. Your wolf has fallen." The word struck like a blade to the gut. "What do you mean?" Her voice cracked despite herself. Ramsay leaned close, his smile cruel. "At the twins, your noble brother met his end, slaughtered like the pup he was. His mother too, the young wolf, skinned of his pride." He chuckled. "A pity I wasn't there to see it." Sansa's knees nearly gave way, but she held herself upright, though her vision blurred with tears she would not shed before him. Robb, dead. Her mother, dead. The pack, shattered. Ramsay watched her, delighted. "Don't you see, sweetling? The North has no king now. Winterfell has no wolves. Only me, only us." The hall blurred around her. She wanted to scream, to claw his eyes out, to curse the gods for their silence. But her body betrayed her, sinking into numbness. She stood there like carved stone, her silence deeper than ever. That night, she wept alone, her face buried in her hands. She thought of Rob's laughter, of her mother's steady strength, of Arya's fierce spirit gone, all gone. She pressed her fists into her eyes until she saw stars. The godswood gave her no comfort, the weirwood's carved face only weeping with her. But grief was quickly replaced by something colder, sharper. If Rob was gone, if Catelyn was gone, then she alone bore the name Stark within these walls. Ramsay might think her broken, but he was wrong. She would not let her family's memory be erased. Winterfell remembered, and so would she. In the days that followed, Ramsay grew more confident, strutting through the halls like a lord, wearing Rob's death like a crown. He began calling himself Lord of Winterfell, and the Bolton's flayed man flew beside the Kraken banners still clinging to the towers. Sansa's silence became more dangerous than ever. People looked to her as though she were a queen in exile, trapped but unyielding. And Ramsay noticed. "You think they see you as their hope," he sneered one night. "You think they'll rise for you, but they won't. They're weak. They only bow to power." "They bow to fear," she answered softly, breaking her silence for the first time in days. "Fear is not power. Fear is rot, and rot crumbles walls." His face twisted, the smile fading. He struck her then, a quick slap across the cheek that burned, but she did not flinch. Her eyes stayed on his, clear and cold. For the first time, his smile wavered into something uncertain. The small folk saw her defiance. They saw her endure. They saw her walk through the halls with her head high despite everything. And slowly, quietly, they began to resist in their own ways. Food went missing from the kitchens, but never for Ramsay's men. Doors were barred against his soldiers. Even the servants' eyes hardened. The North remembered, and though the wolves were scattered, their spirit was not dead. Still, Ramsay tightened his grip. He paraded her through the yards, forced her to stand beside him at executions, whispered promises of marriage she knew were only cages painted with vows. Yet even in her darkest hours, she dreamed of her brothers. Bran, somewhere beyond her. Reach, Rickon wild and fierce, Jon at the wall with his sword and his vows. She dreamed of Arya, who would never bend, who would spit in Ramsay's face and laugh. She dreamed, and in her dreams she was not alone, and she knew then what her silence truly meant. It was not surrender. It was survival. It was waiting. It was the memory of wolves howling in the snow. When Ramsay dragged her once more into the kennels, the hounds snarling and snapping, she did not tremble. She met their eyes and thought of her family's dire wolves, loyal and strong. The hounds belonged to Ramsay, but the wolves were hers, and one day she swore the wolves would return. Winterfell lay under a silence so deep it seemed the castle itself was holding its breath. Snow drifted endlessly from the skies, blanketing, the scars of fire and blood softening the ruins. Yet beneath the white stillness, cruelty thrived. Ramsay Bolton, no longer Snow, for his father had legitimized him after Rob's fall, ruled with madness sharpened to a knife's edge. For Sansa, each day blurred into the next. She rose, walked the halls under watch, sat beside Ramsay in the great hall, endured his games, his threats, his mock affection. Yet she endured. She had become more than silence. She had become Winterfell. Itself, grey, cold, battered but unbroken. Still, the breaking point drew near. The North was restless. Whispers carried through the kitchens, through the stables, even through the stone walls. Stannis Baratheon was marching. The flayed man's banners might hang above the gates, but in the hearts of the people, the direwolf still lived. Servants left food for her in secret, offered quiet nods, muttered the old words when no one else was near. The North remembers. Each time it gave her strength. But Ramsay saw the shift too. One evening, he entered her chambers without knocking, his pale eyes glittering. "They think you give them hope," he said softly. "They look to you, my lady, as though you're their salvation. But you're not. You're mine." His voice was calm, almost tender, but his fingers dug into her arm like iron. "Tomorrow they'll all see. Tomorrow you'll stand beside me dressed as a bride, and you'll swear Winterfell to House Bolton. Before gods and men, you'll be mine forever." Sansa kept her face cold, but her stomach twisted. Marriage to Ramsay meant chains she could never slip. It meant the Stark name twisted, used to legitimize the Boltons' cruelty. It meant the death of everything her family had bled for. That night, she could not sleep. She paced her chambers, her thoughts racing like storm winds. She had endured so long, survived so much, but if she let this happen, if she allowed her silence to become submission, then Winterfell would truly be lost. The Starks would be ghosts, their name chained to a monster. She thought of her father, his steady words, "The lone wolf dies, but the pack survives." She thought of her mother's unyielding love, Robb's courage, Arya's defiance, Jon's vows, Bran's quiet wisdom, Rickon's wild spirit. She was alone, yes, but the pack still lived somewhere. And even if she was the last wolf in Winterfell, she could not let herself be caged forever. At dawn, she made her choice. When Ramsay summoned her to the Godswood for the ceremony, she did not resist. She walked beside him in a gown of grey wool, her face calm as carved ice. The people gathered, forced to witness, their eyes heavy with sorrow. The heart tree loomed above, its red leaves whispering in the cold air. Ramsay smiled as he took her hand, his voice smooth as he began to speak of vows and loyalty, of Winterfell's new age. But Sansa's silence did not falter. She let him speak, let him draw the crowd's gaze, until the moment came when the words were demanded of her. "Do you swear," Ramsay asked, his grin sharp as knives, "to stand with me, to bind Winterfell's blood to House Bolton's?" The courtyard was still. Every eye turned to her. Sansa lifted her chin. Her voice, when it came, was clear and steady, echoing through the Godswood like the cry of a wolf in winter. "I swear nothing." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ramsay's face froze, his smile cracking into rage. He seized her arm, but she pulled free, her voice rising louder. "I am Sansa Stark of Winterfell. This is my home, my father's house, my family's name, and I will see it free again if it costs me my life." For a heartbeat the silence was deafening. Then it broke, not with Ramsay's laughter, not with the hound's snarls, but with the voices of the people. A murmur at first, then louder. A cry that filled the Godswood. "The North remembers!" Ramsay's fury was instant. He shouted for his guards, for the hounds, for blood. But the spark had been lit. The people surged, servants and soldiers alike, years of fear breaking into defiance. Stones flew, knives flashed. Ramsay's men fought, but the crowd was no longer theirs to control. In the chaos, Sansa was dragged, away by trembling hands, not enemies, but allies. Old Nan's grandson, a stable boy she had once defended, a kitchen maid with fire in her eyes. They pulled her into the shadows toward a hidden passage in the crypts. Behind her, Winterfell roared with rebellion. Ramsay's screams carried through the snow, mingling with the cries of his hounds. When the secret door closed behind her, Sansa collapsed against the cold stone, her chest heaving. She was no warrior, no queen, no sword-bearer. But she had been the spark. She had broken her silence, and Winterfell had remembered. In the darkness of the crypt, beneath the stone eyes of her ancestors, she whispered a vow, not to Ramsay, not to the Boltons, but to her family, to the North, to herself. "I will not be a prisoner. Not of this castle. Not of fear. Not ever. Again." Above, Winterfell burned and howled. But somewhere deep in the snow, the wolves stirred. The pack would return, and the Lady of Winterfell would no longer be a prisoner.